This session is part of a presentation on the Eucharist. In this particular session, I'd like to speak about the Eucharist in the Gospel of John. Of all the Gospels, the Gospel of John is the richest for presenting different images, different ideas about the Eucharist. This begins in chapter 6, when first of all Jesus multiplies the loaves and the fish. He takes 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. 5 plus 2 is 7. 7 is the perfect number. And he multiplies it to feed the crowd. Now, what that's saying is that Jesus takes what's already good, what we present to him, and he blesses it and multiplies it. And in doing this, he has the crowd sit on the green grass. It reminds us of Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. In verdant pastures, he gives me repose. That green grass. And Jesus also gives thanks. That idea of his gratitude to the Father. But the word used in this gospel, in the Gospel of John, is not eudokeo, the Greek word, which is found in the synoptics, but rather Eucharistein. You can't even miss it that this is a foreshadowing of the Eucharist. When they finished eating, they gathered 12 baskets of fragments, and Jesus specifically says, gather the fragments. Now, in the oldest liturgical book of the Bible, and the oldest liturgical book outside the Bible, we hear the phrase at the end of the Eucharistic celebration, gather up the fragments. So for a first century community, gather up the fragments was as significant as the phrase used in the story of the road to Emmaus to the breaking of the bread, that people would have immediately heard, this is Eucharist. And then Jesus gives a discourse in which he first of all says that he's the bread descended from heaven, a new manna, which gives us wisdom. But then eventually he says something much greater, that this bread from heaven is his flesh for the life of the world. Flesh, what we call real presence. When John uses the word flesh, it's not like when Paul uses it. When Paul uses it, flesh is our weakness, our fleshiness. Whereas when John uses it, it's our material nature. In fact, in the prologue to this gospel, we hear the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. This Eucharist is truly Jesus. Granted, it's the risen Jesus, but it is really Jesus. Now, people are a bit offended by this because it sounds like he's proposing cannibalism. And he doesn't soften it at all when he says, not only do you have to eat my flesh, you have to drink my blood. Remember in kosher butchering, the Jewish people drained the blood from the animal because blood signifies life and belongs to God alone. Jesus is proposing not that they drink the blood of an animal, but his own blood. And then he continues, you have to devour my flesh. You have to be starving for it. Because if you don't, you cannot have eternal life. You won't be part of the kingdom. So chapter 6, we see what we call the vertical dimension of the Eucharist, the real presence. That Jesus is truly present in that bread and that wine. Realistically, this is a mystery. We can't fully explain how this can be true, but we believe it. Then we have chapter 13. This is the Last Supper. And unlike the other Gospels, where Jesus takes bread and wine and says, this is my body, this is my blood, in the Gospel of John, Jesus takes off his cloak, and knowing that he came from the Father and knowing that he's going to the Father, so whatever he does right after this will not be a negation of who he is, but rather a revelation of who he is. He washes the feet of the disciples. By doing this, he's giving us a horizontal definition of what the Eucharist is. The Eucharist is also service. Jesus serving us and we serving each other, washing each other's feet, a service that would be done by a slave. We have to give ourselves totally to Christ and to those around us. Now, when he comes to Peter, Peter doesn't want his feet washed. Very often, we don't like to be served by others. We like to be in charge. And Jesus says, if you don't let me wash your feet, you'll have no part with me. So notice that part of the coin of charity is to allow ourselves to be served. Because when we need help and we don't let others serve us, It's not only being arrogantly self-sufficient, it's also robbing from others the opportunity to do charity. So, chapter 13, the horizontal dimension of Eucharist, forming communion with those around us. Chapter 21, Jesus has already risen, the disciples are fishing, and Jesus tells them to try the other side of the boat and catch 153 fish. 153, according to Greek philosophers, is the number of species of fish in the world. Jesus is calling them to be fishers of men. They're going to catch everybody in their nets. And then they get to shore, and he's serving a meal of bread and fish. But this time, the fish is emphasized and not the bread, because he's calling them to be fishers of men. A reminder that Eucharist is also a call to mission, that we're called to serve each other, that it's not just you and me, Jesus, and I'll bask in your love, but now I've got to share your love with those who most need it, with those who are starving, with those who are dying of thirst. That's my goal, because not only do I receive the sacrament, I become that sacrament. St. Augustine says that in one of his homilies, become that which you receive. And so we become visible sacraments of the love of God.